Okay, 9:05. So why don't we start up, and we'll stop
Oh,
that share. I realized when I was doing the video last week that I had left that up the entire time, which actually was unintentional. But it was to remind everybody that we are recording. You can mute yourself depending upon your level of concerns for privacy. You can turn off your video. You can rename yourself and all of that stuff. That's the pseudo legal requirements for the beginning of the meeting. So we are. This is the end of week 8 from our count on doing this, and it is, as I said last week, where it's beginning to feel like the new normal. And the good news is, it's pretty much the same old stuff now in terms of DEP work. The COVID specific information, all of that has become pretty routine, I think. So not a huge number of items to update you on. The one big difference is we are starting to talk about, as I'm sure you are, about how one returns back to the office and what that will look like. And we don't have any details certainly about when the date will be. There's no insider information about whether May 18th is going to be the date for the governor, or whether it would be put off again. So we're all waiting, just like you are, to see what that means. But even if that date holds, the what happens on May 19th, when we're supposedly back to work for DEP, I'm 99 and 99/100% sure that May 19th is going to look a lot like today. And for some period of time, likely through a large part of the summer, if not all the summer, we are going to be limiting, a lot. Limiting seems like such a strong word, but there's going to be a lot of flexibility in how our office operations run. And we're certainly not going to all be back in our cubicles on day one on the return. It will be eased in. People have a lot of concerns about what the commute will be like and the risks associated with that, what being in the office in cubicles near everybody else will look like. So I think for some period of time, it's going to look and include a lot of telecommuting, just like it does now. It will be good because we'll have some more access to the office, which will help on certain things. But I think a lot of our work is going to continue to be done remotely. And frankly, I think it's a good thing that this, if nothing else, the COVID experience has shown that even though we weren't prepared to do this, we were able to kind of quickly develop systems and protocols to allow work to continue. And I think it's been kind of, I want to say surprisingly, but happily, it's been, I think, a success from our perspective. And I think it's a good example of how looking to long-term DEP can kind of provide that flexibility to the staff and employees. Right now, it's out of necessity. In the future, it will be, as a kind of a good way to conduct business. If nothing else, the carbon footprint of the telecommuting is fantastic, and it will help us with that. So there's a lot of planning there, making sure we have the necessary PPE, which seems to be more plentiful these days, more accessible. I know my town just announced that they're going to drive around and give masks to everybody, which is nice for that. And DEP is working with EPA on getting PPE out to the wastewater treatment plant operators and the public water suppliers, and there's kind of essential infrastructure. There's been a lot of planning in the other programs, the water programs, for how to do that to get them PPE. So it looks like we'll have the kind of equipment in place and the resources in place to kind of ease that transition. But it's going to, most of the summer is probably going to look more like what we're doing now rather than how we were operating, say, in January. And I know other places like the New York Times announced yesterday that they're not going back until September 8th. So I think many people, many operations are going to be working kind of roughly the same way. Kind of the hardest thing, and that we'll be trying to work out, in my opinion, is how we deal with public meetings and public hearings. We have sites that have large public interests where we would normally fill a high school or middle school auditorium to talk about actions that are being taken at the site and remedial approaches. How to do that remotely is going to be more difficult, but we're working through different systems for that. Personally, I think doing things like Board of Selectmen meetings and Board of Health meetings, which usually mean going to a small town in the middle of nowhere late at night and then me having to drive back to the Boston area. I think doing that remotely is a huge improvement. But we're still looking to having those meetings, doing the necessary outreach, meeting with the local communities, but figuring out a way how to do that. I think that is one of our biggest challenges. The others would be kind of coordinating some of the actual site work that's being done. The good news, many of you may have seen EPA's press release the other day about brownfields grants. Massachusetts got, cities and towns got 6 of them: Chicopee, Great Barrington, Lawrence, Lowell, New Bedford, Peabody, got sizable EPA brownfields assessment and cleanup grants, kind of a mix of them. So we're excited about that and looking forward to working with them in the coming year to spend that money. And then there's the other thing that keeps coming up, which is the state budget, which I know nothing about. Again, have not heard any details, so there's no insider information available, but that certainly the people kind of above us in state government are looking at that, and I'm sure there'll be, as we come to the end of this fiscal year in June and looking forward to the next fiscal year, that's going to be a challenge as we move ahead. And hopefully there'll be creative ways and resources from the federal government as well that will be available as we move ahead. But I think that's going to be a challenge for both state and local governments, as it is probably for the private sector as well. What happened to everybody's revenue? So those were my big things. I've opened it up for any questions or discussions that you guys may have. You can unmute yourself, just to point out. You guys are all nicely muted.
Okay, well, I have 2 questions, comments.
Wendy, hi.
Thank you. I didn't know if you were going to go to your regional directors first, but
well,
you want to do that?
I could do that. Steve, do you want to repeat what you said before?
Well, I was telling you before that things were just slogging along, nothing too exciting to report. But I have to say one thing that program that is really seems to be working even more smoothly than any of the others is emergency response. I mean, they've all got the vehicles and the laptops, and they're used to doing on-call work on weekends and nights and things like that. So they really had a leg up on the rest of us when it comes to working remotely. It's working out pretty well.
Yeah, I think that shows the benefits of kind of planning for that remote work, where we had those systems and the equipment and the resources in place. It was very smooth transition for that. I think EPA kind of more broadly experienced the same thing because their staff had been doing telecommuting for a while. So they had those resources. And from what I've heard so far, I think DEP is looking to move more in that direction. But the rest of the staff are playing kind of catch up, and we've been pasting together combinations of laptops and VPNs and other equipment to make it work for everybody else. But the ER staff has been fantastic throughout all of this. Elizabeth, do you want to say anything about the Western region?
Sure. I would just echo what Steve said, that ER has had a pretty smooth transition. There haven't been as many incidents as there usually are. I'm not sure what that's about. And our audits program actually has been pretty competent at working remotely, because all of the resources they need are on that. So that's been pretty good too. So they're kind of humming along as well. But I think people are adjusting, although they do miss the office and adjusting to the new way we're operating.
Yeah, just because we can do things remotely, there is something lost by not having that personal interaction and in talking with people by the elevators, that sort of thing. Gerard, Southeast?
So I would echo what both Elizabeth and Steve said. The artist program we've actually caught up on all our screens, and so we're digging deeper and doing, a bunch of folks are doing level 3s. We're trying to decide whether or not those level 3s would require an inspection. In some cases they don't, in some cases they may. In those cases, we'll probably issue notice of audits and indicate that we will schedule the inspection when the state of emergency is over, and that the notice of audit findings will not go out until we've done that. So we're doing that a little bit. We are also, as you mentioned earlier, Paul, we're wrestling with some public involvement issues. One of the things I was talking to an LSP about is possibly they were going to put together a PowerPoint and have it available on like a website. They're looking into local cable access to see if that can be used to show the PowerPoint. More folks may have access to a TV than a computer, so we might get more public involvement that way. So we'll see if that works out.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be doing a Board of Selectmen hearing in the next couple of weeks. And yeah, I think one of the good things about that is that is broadcast on public cable as well. So I think people will have the choice of either looking at it, streaming online, as we do it live remotely, or watching it on TV. So be kind of cool. We'll see. Hopefully all the technology seems to be holding together and working. I don't see Mark here. I think Central has a conflicting meeting at this time as well. But
Paul?
Yes?
There is a question from Carol.
Oh, okay.
About state-funded projects being delayed. Any kind of update on that?
State-funded projects being delayed. Carol, I don't suppose you have a particular example you want to ask about.
No, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but
yeah, no, I mean there are a couple things that that play into this. So we do have a number of state-funded projects, not to pick on a particular one, and how they move ahead is going to depend upon the particulars about kind of the timing of when we can start. Each project has particular requirements about how it can be done, when it can be done. A simple dig, there's an imminent hazard because there are PCBs in sufficient soil at a daycare, for example, hypothetically. That can be done quickly. And in fact, right now, it's a better time to do it since the daycares are closed. So it's a lot less disruptive. So some things actually might be moving faster because of everybody is away from those areas. But other more complex ones where the timing is critical, where there's a window of opportunity to do particular remedial actions, and there's a lot of construction or preparation necessary for it. And if you miss that window, you might have to put it off for some period of time. So all of that has to be weighed and figure out kind of what's the optimal time for doing it. But where we can do it, we are, but we're trying, as long as it can be done safely for the people that may be living or working nearby, and safely for the people that are actually carrying out those operations. So it's a case-by-case basis. Any other questions? I don't have chat up for some reason on mine, so I'm not following the chat. So Liz, if you can keep an eye on the chat questions.
Yeah.
Okay, the last DEP person I would pick on would be Luke Rogers. Anything from OGC that you would like to say?
Thank you, Paul. I would just say, we lawyers, obviously we have very desk-oriented jobs. So some of the IT stuff was a bit of a challenge, but people have shown a tremendous degree of resourcefulness and are chugging along full time doing their jobs. So I've been really proud of all the attorneys in all the different regions who have kept working.
Okay, so now we'll go open it up. Anybody? Wendy, did you have a question?
Yes, I had two things,
Sorry.
two items. The first is that I wanted to let DP know, and people on the call, if you didn't already know, that the LSPA bill that was is sponsored by Senator Ian Goby, was successfully moved out of the Joint Committee on Financial Services in February, and is now at the Massachusetts Senate Ways and Means Committee for consideration. And we've heard that the state Senate is hoping to begin meeting next month. So we are eager to get going in the short window that we have to try to continue to work to get that bill passed. And in an effort to do that, we're preparing some materials for the new folks that we'll be speaking with. Senator Rodericks is the chair of that committee. And so I'm putting out a request for folks on the call and for you to talk up with your colleagues and anyone you know. If anyone is working on a residential heating oil spill, especially now, to shoot me an email, get in touch with the LSPA, because we found that having real situations that are happening at the time that we speak to legislators can be very persuasive. We don't need the homeowner to reveal his or her name. It's always great to know what the community is, what the town is or city, but most of the information can be kept anonymous, and even having information from an LSP if the homeowner isn't interested in sharing any information. It just, at least for the LSPA to know, there are few projects going on in different communities. I mean, even that information is useful for us to share with the legislators. So if anyone knows of anything going on, please let us know. That'd be really helpful. And just as a heads up, the Senate Bill 594 would require insurance companies to provide coverage for first party and third party spills, which is different than what the current law requires. The current law requires only for, if asked for, the insurance companies will make that coverage available. So people have to opt in, basically. They have to know about it first, which is a problem, and then they have to opt in, which is another problem. So that's a kind of a call for information. And then the other—
Who would they send that to, Wendy?
They can send it to info@lspa.org, or they can send it to me at lspa.wendy@gmail.com.
Okay.
The LSPA sent out an email blast this morning with that information also. So if you need a reminder. And then the second thing is, we've had some emails and phone calls from LSPs over the last week or so especially for LSPs whose licenses expired toward the end of April or on the last day of April. And what we had been hearing is that they had been shut out of EDP. So I've been in contact with these people individually, and most of them are back in, but I just wanted to ask if DP had any suggestions about how the LSPA can be helpful in handling that, and if you have any suggestions for what we should tell our LSP members.
Yeah, it's as you know, the board is separate from DEP, so so a large part of this is kind of in the board's territory.
Right.
And because they're two separate kind of agencies, actors within, they're still within EEA. But the kind of, I think, view it as the data systems, there's a disconnect.
Right.
The LSP board data systems, which tracks kind of when the expiration dates are and all of that. And then some information is then fed over to EDP to determine, can this person upload? So I think the problem is partly that interaction and where changes can be made in order to allow the submittals through EDP. So unfortunately, it doesn't seem like, because of the data systems and working remotely, that there's a nice, easy, write a script that will just change everything all at once.
Yeah.
Which you would think would be easy to do, but not at the moment. But it is easy to make the changes to allow people to upload to EDP once we know about who the person is.
Right.
And then that can happen fairly quickly. And one of our staff, Chris Borges, is kind of actually has the VPN access and makes that work. So I would recommend, if anybody has that problem, find either that your license has or will expire kind of within this time period, that you communicate, send an email to Beverly Roby, beverly.roby@mass.gov, who's the executive director of the LSB board. But to kind of facilitate it and make it all happen a lot faster, I would also CC Christopher Borges, Christopher, CHRISTOPHER .Borges, BORGES @mass.gov, and he's the person that will actually make it happen. So to the extent that kind of he's aware of it at the same time that the board is being informed of it, it will kind of make things happen a lot faster.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? Should I start picking on people? Dot's kind of raising her hand.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Dot.
Thanks again for holding these. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things that I learned yesterday on a call with some wetland folks and some MassDEP folks was that the emergency order timeline may be very different than the back to work order. I've been thinking that all of our extensions on permits and on state permits and other things that are extended through the emergency period, I was assuming that if we all got back to work in May 18th or June 1 or sometime in the near future for our new normal, that would be the time when work could get going again. I'm speaking, of course, both to wetlands permits, but it impacts other state-related permits. And what I realized yesterday was that the timeline for the emergency order may be extended far longer because of federal funding or whatever other reasons than the back to work order or our new normal of actually getting into offices. So the timelines could be very different. So 45 days after the end of the emergency order is when a lot of permits might get, or for applications for wetlands work can get started. But now I'm realizing that emergency order might go on for much longer than what I was anticipating. So I didn't know whether that would impact BWSC activities in the sort of a bifurcation of these timelines. It's sort of a question.
Yeah, you're right. The kind of, it's easy to think of, well, whatever the return date as being the end of the emergency, but that's not the case. There was an official start of the state of emergency, and at some point there will be an official end to the state of emergency. And I think that's what you're looking at. And that will probably be sometime well past the May 18th date, or whatever the date ends up being. So from the waste site cleanup perspective, you know, I think we do have it a little bit easier, partly because we don't do permits. Well, we have one, but so we didn't run into this problem as much. But to the extent that the work that we do might require other permits, particularly like wetlands, orders of conditions permits, then that could affect it. And it is a balance in the conversations that I've heard in the department. You know, the things that are being balanced here is the people that hold the permit and don't want the permit expiring because they can't do the work and they can't get around to it. But also kind of the complicating layer on that is giving people appropriate appeal rights to the permits being issued. And particularly in wetlands cases, you know, where you do see a lot of appeals of orders of conditions, you need to give people that might want to appeal enough time to do that and have the ability to do that. So it really is a case of kind of conflicting or complicated timelines there that I have not heard any, you know, resolution of that. I know people are thinking about it, particularly in those programs that issue the permits, about how all of this will play out and how it will transition back into normalcy. And I haven't heard this specifically, so again, you know, don't quote me that Paul Locke said that this is going to happen. But I would imagine that as we think about it and how it would transition back, that one thing that might happen, and I don't know if it will, and maybe most likely wouldn't, is that there may be modifications of those executive orders as we move ahead. And as we have more experience and as we see what will be needed in order to transition back to normalcy. So somewhere in between, somewhere in that range of possibilities, we'll find a way to do it. But there are people specifically thinking about it as it affects all not the wayside cleanup, the DEP permits.
Thank you.
So, you know, that's, yeah, I said absolutely nothing there, but except people are thinking about it, and yeah, there will be something. Anybody else?
Susan has her hand up.
Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm liking this. I'm green today. See that?
I know that's a little disconcerting there.
You don't like it?
Well, it's like
green, you know?
it's almost like you have a projector projecting onto your face rather than.
I know, it's cool. I thought it was different today. Anyway, you're gonna have to put up with it for a minute. Yeah. I just wanted to elaborate on that. It gets even more complicated because towns are allowed to continue to do permitting remotely. And we're working on different ways of getting ink signatures and passing it from house to house for the conservation commissioners and gathering it. And I mean, it's a process. But there are certain towns, such as Arlington, that are continuing to do permits and not waiting for the 45 days after the end of the emergency, because we're feeling that we'll have so many gathering up by then. It'll be really, really difficult to get through the backlog. And we feel it's unfair to the applicants to have to wait that long. So we're continuing. So there's another wrinkle in it, that some towns are doing it and some towns are not. They are not willing to go through the permitting process under remote conditions. It's too difficult.
Yeah. So how is Arlington dealing with the potential appeal and the role of kind of the abutters and interested parties?
Right. Well, we're obviously abutters and interested parties are notified, and they can attend the public meetings, which we have, the open public Zoom meetings. The other issue we've done is we have extended deadlines for deliberations and actually voting on the permit in the Conservation Commission. So we allow extra time for the public to comment, and also extra time to deliberate since it's more difficult in this framework. You're allowed to do that as a Conservation Commission chair, even without a quorum. So that's interesting. It's in our regs, which we found recently and used that option. So that's what we've been doing. And then we notify the applicants we've extended the deadline, so you have more chance to comment or do, you know, et cetera. So that's how we've dealt with that. I'll turn this off so you're not so disconcerted.
Oh, no. It's just sorry. It's just out in the lower right of my screen.
I needed a change, you know?
It's psychedelic.
Yeah.
Has anybody experienced kind of the permitting pieces from the regulated community side? You're working on projects where you need a permit, or your client may be appealing a permit? No, everything's just been put off. Okay, well, any other questions?
Well, I'd just add in that we have had an experience where we're finding that we're trying to obtain access to a site, and the attorney for the property owner is just throwing out the COVID like everything is shut down. And because it's related to, indirectly, it's related to a Conservation Commission order. And the attorneys are having arguments about whether or not the tolling affects it. You know, the city attorneys or city solicitors arguing that, no, it doesn't apply. And the private parties attorneys are arguing that it does apply. And we're stuck in the middle, not able to get access. So yeah. That's been an issue. So there are people are throwing it up as, you know, we can't let you on our site because of this. So yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, and Paul, we've been struggling to get any sort of communication or any correspondence back from the Boston Inspection Services Department for permits. Just to be able to, you know, drill a test boring, you need a permit in the city of Boston, and we haven't been successful getting any feedback or any of our calls returned. I don't know if anyone else has had any similar issues or problems with that.
No, any? You know, so I would broaden that question. What is your experience working with other cities and towns? So in that case, Boston is kind of, the communication is more difficult. Are you finding other towns that are kind of more active and kind of more open for business, if you will? And Matt Hackman is raising his hand.
Yes. So I got a call from a fellow LSP who said his client had initiated remediation work under the MCP in anticipation of redeveloping a property, but has now come back and said, hey, you know, everything is now changed. So they'd gotten as far as excavating soil and stockpiling it adjacent to the excavation. And basically their client says, can you just put it back in the hole? And we're just going to have to wait here because there's no money, no income, no nothing. So we discussed the corrective action management unit concept and whether it might be possible to put soil back in the hole even though it was contaminated. But I was interested in your thoughts about, you know, MCP projects that were initiated in anticipation of things going differently and suddenly they didn't. And no funding, no nothing, sort of a force majeure situation. What do you think?
Anybody from D?
No comment?
So I'll I'll talk while giving some of the DEP staff some time to think about it. I think part of what we wrote in the initial guidance that went out early on in this is, as people were kind of buttoning up projects because construction was forbidden or they couldn't do it safely in terms of COVID. Certainly one of our concerns was that if work was going to be delayed on a project, that we would want people to make sure that the project was left in a safe and secure state, that's not creating additional exposures, and that would allow that work, at some point in the future to continue. So my kind of certainly initial and uninformed on the specifics opinion would be that in some cases, depending upon the circumstances, I would think kind of putting material back in the hole in order to make it secure, to have it safe until kind of the longer term options are considered, might be a potential option. I'm anticipating being corrected on that. But that it should be clear to the owner, the responsible party, that whatever these short-term measures are to secure the site, it doesn't get them out of the need in the longer term to actually follow through on the cleanup.
Yeah, I think that it was being made clear to the client that that just because the whole world fell apart doesn't mean that the wheels of the MCP grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine, to borrow a phrase, and they will continue to grind. But there may be things that can be done to sort of try to mitigate. The concern was that it wasn't like, we think we'll be back in 3 months or 6 months or something. It's like, who knows when this is ever going to come back. I mean, it might be years, it might be never. Who knows? The whole project viability just collapsed. So, but I was thinking, he and I were thinking the same thing, is that, attempting to the stockpile is now covered on and under 6 mil poly, covered, anchored, et cetera. But maintaining that indefinitely, especially with lack of funds, seemed like it seemed more problematic than getting it back in the hole. So
yeah, I have visions of stockpiled soil with torn plastic and tree saplings growing out of it, and as one possible long-term outcome, which is not a good state. But I would open it up to any of the DEP DRDs, anybody else who want to offer any different thoughts? No? Okay. Good then. So, and any other thoughts, questions? Anybody else have their hand up? You're doing well? I'm making croissants this morning. It's what I did at 7 a.m.
Yeah, there you go. You have it for the whole class, Paul?
If you're driving through Melrose, I think they'll be ready Saturday morning. It's a several-day adventure.
So do you have orders that we can place for Saturday?
Yep. All right. They're spelt flour croissants.
Oh,
nice.
Yeah, funny how you can. It's much easier to get specialty flours, so it's interesting playing around with different things. So, hearing nothing else,
don't forget it's Mother's Day on Sunday, by the way.
I've reminded my children. We're going to have kind of an egg strata meal was the request for brunch. Okay, well, not hearing any other questions, we'll do this again next week. Hopefully it will be similarly boring without any dramatic news, which means that work continues on.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Hope you have a good week.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Everybody else have a good week too.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.